Hi, and thank you for joining our webinar, Transform Your Supply Chain with EWM and SAP GTS Integration. Today we have speakers Martha Olds from Applied Materials. Martha is the Application Systems Program Manager at Applied, and she has led various business transformation projects, including SAP GTS and EWM during her time at Applied. We also have Sriwasan Narayan from Krypt Inc. Sriwasan is an experienced SCM consultant with over 14 years of experience with SAP SCM. In this session, we'll be addressing how to understand trade and compliance checks in the logistics process. You'll hear what trade and compliance checks are available in GTS and EWM. You'll learn how to block non-compliant documents in EWM, see how customized trade compliance document creation provides a user-friendly approach for trade document printing, and get tips on and checks to be done at the source of logistic documents instead of later in the supply chain. Just a quick introduction to Applied Materials, if you're not familiar. Applied is a global leader in the innovative equipment, services, and software. They are well known for being manufacturers of semiconductors, but they also operate in the segments of global services, display, and energy and environmental solutions. They are headquartered in Santa Clara, California, and they have a global presence across 18 countries. They are a very innovative company and have over 10,000 patents issued.
I will move on from the About Krypt section and just pass it over to Martha Olds, who will go into the Applied Materials section of the webinar.
Hello, I hope you can all hear me. My name is Martha Olds. I've worked at Applied Materials for over 19 years now, and I've been involved in GTS since we implemented it at first, which is at the very end of 2008. It was part of a larger business transformation project at Applied where we did a complete re-implementation of SAP. We use a lot of different modules, SCM, ECC, CRM, etc. We have a broad spectrum. GTS is one of the key components. We have a pretty broad spectrum of use of GTS. In the compliance area, we do SPL screening, embargo screening, and license determination for exports. We have configured 10 different legal regulations, so it's quite global. On the customs side, we procure HTS content for about 35 countries from Customs Info. We generate two different forms, which is the commercial invoice and the export declaration form, which we call SLI. Shipper's Letter of Instruction. We are in the process of implementing electronic AES filing for the United States. We have some of the smaller plants turned on and a medium-sized plant turned on. We plan to implement or roll out the filing or complete the U.S. filing implementation with the very largest plant for our North America Continental Distribution Center sometime within September. We also use electronic compliance reporting, otherwise known as ECR. This is for EU intrastat reporting for intra-community part movements. This is required reporting. We operate in about 9 different countries in Europe, and we pretty much use out-of-the-box functionality. I think we had to do one enhancement related to Italy, which had some specific requirements. But the configuration to set this up is quite extensive, but once you have it set up, it's quite robust. In 2011, we implemented letter of credit functionality. So that's to help manage a different type of risk related to credit as opposed to trade compliance. I think one of the most recent items I can share is that we upgraded to GTS 10.1 just a few months ago. We had been a rollout customer for 7.1 back in 2008, but we just upgraded. Okay, so next I'm going to give an overview of trade and compliance checks. So as many of you know, trade and compliance checks are mandatory to avoid customs penalties and also to ensure that our shipments are compliant with all regulations. As I mentioned before, we have about 10 different regulations configured, so it's quite robust, everywhere from Philippines to Taiwan to Japan, Korea, etc. We use a single EU regulations for all of the EU countries. So failure to do these checks can result in shipments not being delivered in a timely manner, and you can get financial loss from penalties and so forth, and you could have delays which impact your customer satisfaction. So typical items that we check for are country of origin, embargo, sanctioned party list, legal control, which is licenses, and as I mentioned before, letter of credit. Now, country of origin is required on the commercial invoice form. There are not legal control checks for it, but it's a key piece of data. We'll talk further about that coming up. So again, country of origin is required on a commercial invoice, and so it's part of what gets reported, especially at the point of import. Now, as many of you know, there are geopolitical situations which affect what can be shipped to customers in one country from another country. For example, there are not a diplomatic relationship between Malaysia and Israel, and so in some cases the imports would not be allowed without an import license. We have faced that, and we have put in an enhancement to help control this. On the embargo, we have configured 5 different countries for embargo, and so there's a hard stop anytime we try to have a document with one of these countries. I remember a few years ago there was an error in one of our vendor masters where they were trying to use South Korea as the country, and by accident they put North Korea. So of course it went on block until we could figure out what the root cause was. So sanctioned party list screening is based on a list of persons and companies with whom trade is prohibited by law, normally because of some bad behavior that they've exhibited in the past, or illegal behavior. And we have an interface with MK Denial, which we use to help keep our SPL entities up to date in GTS. Here's a process flow of how our SPL system works. So on the ECC side, when we have new partners, new customers, and vendors, they are screened, and documents are also screened. As new documents and partners are created, they go to GTS for SPL check. The SPL data is updated through MK Denial. And if there's a match, then the document gets blocked. This is a header level check. And at that point, our business users will take a look at it, and normally we find it's a false positive, so then they release it. GTS also gives you the ability to keep an audit trail of SPL screening that's been done, so it can be reported when requested by the government authorities. Okay, later on we're going to review a scenario when the vendor is included in the negative business partner list. If it's negative, it's on the negative list, that means it's going to block every time. This is something you can set up in the system. And so then we'll see how the shipment from the vendor is blocked for further processing. We do sometimes have partners that we add to the positive list. That means they never get checked. Examples of these are plant customers and plant vendors because they're entirely internal. So we don't need to screen on ourselves. But we don't want things to get blocked because of some text which is in the partner name. I want to talk about an enhancement. Oh, excuse me. This is to where you can look at the business partner record and see if it's blocked. This is an example of the business partner screen, and below that control tab there's a little tiny box that says block, and it has a checkbox in it. So that's what lets us know that this is blocked. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about license checking. So we have to check for licenses. I mean, we sell a lot of controlled goods, so we're required to have a lot of licenses from a lot of different countries. So we can't import or export with specific authorization and licenses in place. So whenever you create a document that contains a material for which a license is needed, the system will verify that a license is in place. Here's an overview of the license checking process. I see this as really being the heart of GTS. And so you can see in the upper left-hand corner is where you have different documents that are being created: sales orders, purchase orders, deliveries, etc. And as they're created, when they're saved, then they're screened by GTS on a real-time basis. Then GTS goes through this license determination process, which is quite complex. And there's different criteria that it looks at in determining the proper license and whether the license is in place. Going from the top, you see you have the partner, customer, vendor, and that determines the ship to in the transaction. The ship from is determined by the legal unit, which is tied to the plant from which the part is going to be exported. On the material master side, for each legal regulation, you maintain an ECCN. And so the three elements come together: the ship from, the ship to, and the ECCN number to determine what's the proper license type. And if we have a license in place, then the transaction will pass. One thing I wanted to mention here is that this license determination matrix is maintained by the users and extremely complex, but it's almost entirely automated. I know that in some companies it's not nearly so automated, and they have to do a lot of manual license application to each material which is being shipped. But ours does almost everything automatic. We have a few exceptions where we have things specifically configured for manual application. One example is the RPL, license exception process, because in these cases the customers are required to provide some documentation before we ship. And so it'll be blocked until we get the required documentation, at which point the users will release. So this, like I say, this is the heart of GTS, but for applied materials it works very well. I'm going to talk a little bit about letter of credit. This is more on credit risk as opposed to trade risk, but it gets incorporated into your logistics processes, because if something requires a letter of credit, you need to be sure that all the required documents are in place before the document is released by the global credit people, and indicating that all of the documents are available. And sometimes they include trade documents like the commercial invoice. So you can configure any number of letter of credit types and statuses. We have quite a few configured in Applied Materials. We have had to do several customizations. The out-of-box didn't meet all of our needs, so we have customizations for letter of credit amendments, for reporting, and we also have a workflow to alert users of changes in status, etc., so they're aware of when it's their turn to do a step in this process. Okay, now we're going to talk about PO license checks. This relates to inbound POs, because of course STOs, which are outbound, are also considered POs, but this is specifically talking about license checks for inbound, which is for outside suppliers. So in some cases you don't have a material record because you're buying an indirect good, so it doesn't have a part number. If that's the case, under standard functionality, the POs can't pass to GTS for screening because it's looking for an ECCN number, which is going to be tied to a part number. So what we did is we use a user exit where we insert a dummy in the material master record that can be assigned to those lines which have no part number. And so we created a material called EAR 99. So that when it sees that there's no material, it inserts this EAR 99 material, and we have that tied to a non-control, like an EAR 99 ECCN, so it can pass to GTS and be released just through the regular compliance processes. So this gives the specific user exit that we use to pass the dummy material, EAR 99, from the MARA table and insert it into the material number field from the PO when the material number is blank. Okay, here I'm going to pass off to Srivatsan because he will talk about the logistics processes and interfaces with GTS and EWM.
Thank you, Mara. Hello, everybody. So my name is Srivatsan, and I work at Krypt, primarily responsible for logistics and EWM implementations. So the focus of this presentation is going to be about what developments and what customizations we did primarily in the logistics area to make sure we meet 2 or 3 requirements. First requirement, you need to be in compliance. You need to make sure all trade documents are executed and they're executed properly. Number 2, we need to make sure the logistics processes flow through well with minimum interruptions. Number 3, the logistics user, for example, somebody in the warehouse who prints and export documentation, is able to print these documents with minimum interruptions. So these were like 3 of the main goals with which we did a lot of customization as well as enhancements to make sure the process flows well and the logistics users are able to produce trade documents exactly when they need it. Now let's first quickly check how it works in terms of how EWM, GTS, and ECC talk to each other. When an outbound delivery gets created in ECC, it gets pushed to EWM. Just like you see here, it goes to EWM as an outbound delivery. Now the same outbound delivery also is replicated in GTS in terms of trade documents. Now what we are going to show you is a couple of ways where we can do trade checks and blocks from an EWM perspective. So let's first talk about country of origin. Country of origin, typically you would capture it at the time of goods receipt, and it's stored in ECC in the material master, and that would work typically if one material always has a single COO, which is probably true most of the time, but you will also have end up having multiple COOs for a single material. We'll talk about that in a second. So in case where it's only a single COO and it's stored in ECC in the material master, we would first like to make sure that the outbound delivery is not even created in ECC if the country of origin is missing. The goal behind this was, as I mentioned before, we want to be in a position in the warehouse when we print the trade documents that we are not blocked for any reason towards the last step of a shipment processing. So we do not want to pack products and take it all the way to the end of the floor and just before you PGI or something like that. You don't want to be blocked because you're missing a country of origin or something like that. So generally the logistics requirements are mostly try to block them ahead of time. Do not let logistics processes start, go halfway through, and then block a document or block a shipment processing because something is missing in GTS or in ACC. So primary requirement, yeah, block the delivery if a COO is missing. So like I mentioned in the second point, if you block a outbound delivery document in ACC, obviously a delivery never gets created in ACC, and that delivery is also never distributed to EWM. So the way we can do it is typically we use a body which is available in standard SAP. We use that, and then we code in a logic that says, if you have a COO missing for a particular line item, we would not let you create the delivery. And a couple of other requirements around this is it's not enough if you block a document because the COO is missing. We also need to make sure the right people are informed that we are blocking a delivery because the COO is missing. Obviously, what we expect to happen is this right set of folks get notified, both from a logistics and trade perspective, and then they go back and close the loop and maintain a COO so the delivery can be released. Once a delivery gets released, obviously it's going to be processed through the logistics processes and it's going to be shipped out. So two main requirements from a system perspective: block the delivery and also inform the right set of people that this delivery is blocked because of missing COO. So once we code the body during the delivery creation process, we get a custom error message that says delivery creation failed because you're missing a country of origin for this particular material and plant combination. We also have another program that actually runs in a batch job, which actually collects all these errors and then sends it out to a set of email based on the error itself. The way we handle that is all these messages have a custom message number. So based on the custom message number, we know which set of people need to get emails, and then we send it out to the right set of people. So since it's a custom error message, we have a custom message number. We use that and send the emails out either hourly depending on the message or daily depending on the criticality of the message. We send it out to the right set of people. So in cases where we have multiple COOs, the right way to do it in SAP would be to have batch management, where you can have batch characteristics enabled, and then you could have country of origin as one of the characteristics, and then use that to determine or use that to find the right country of origin in the subsequent logistics processes. Typically, the country of origin would be needed at the time of identified at the time of picking in warehouse. Applied Materials does not use batch management for this purpose, but Krypt has experience in implementing this for country of origin purposes. Towards the end of this presentation, I have given you a link where we have Krypt submitting a paper about this one and SEM experts, where we have explained in detail how batch characteristics can be used to track country of origin. So you will have that reference towards the end of this presentation. But basically, yeah, batch management is the right way to do it if you have multiple country of origin. So you track it at the time of receipt, and then you have labels clearly identifying which which batch belongs to which country of origin and so on. And then what you can do is at the time of picking, you can either use standard SAP or custom picking strategies that can help you pick the right material with the right country of origin. One of the main advantages of using this particular logic or this particular process is that there are some trade requirements that clearly specify you cannot ship products with a particular country of origin to a particular or to a specific country. So things like that can be handled easily using batch management and characteristics. So to do that, what you would do is you would add a characteristic in the batch management classification, and then you would add the characteristic value called COO, which is country of origin, and then you would maintain the different country of origins which are characteristics in this particular batch management classification. And once you do that, and then you can also determine like I told you earlier, if you want to make sure only a specific country of origin is chosen at the time of picking, you can use a batch search procedure, which is available in standard SAP. So you can use the combination of class and characteristics, which you just saw about the characteristic being country of origin, and then you can use that combination and then pick the right batch, basically making sure you pick the right country of origin when you pick and ship it to the right destination. So the easier way to distribute this to EWM, so in EWM you can always pick by batch. So we would configure batch search strategy in ECC to pick the right batch when the delivery gets created, and then that delivery gets distributed to EWM with the batch number. So in EWM you just go and pick the batch number that is in the delivery. Like you see here, the batch number from ECC got transferred into EWM. So all you do in EWM is just go and pick this batch, and that way you have made sure you have picked the right country of origin for the right destination. Now, if you have complex requirements for COO, you can also do a custom coding in EWM and also custom batch determination strategy to get COO information. And then you can pass that COO information all the way back to GTS to be used in customs document. So one of the things that we have done in Krypt is enable a good communication between GTS and EWM. So you will see a report that I will show shortly, which is more like a dashboard. We have actually built that in EWM, pulling GTS information, and we also have built a robust mechanism to pass data back from EWM to GTS as well. This is custom, not standard, but we have built that in Krypt, and we have done more. We're building more data as we speak and more requirements as we speak to the dashboard. So I'll quickly show that towards the end of this presentation. So going back, so in terms of inbound processes or how the trade checks happen in inbound, so typically you would create a purchase order in ECC, you would have an inbound delivery in ECC, and that inbound delivery gets distributed to EWM. The same purchase order information also gets distributed to GTS as well. Both the purchase order as well as the inbound delivery in ECC get transferred to GTS as well. So the goal behind this check, inbound check, would be when the inbound delivery gets created in EWM and before we process, put away and so on, we would like to make sure that delivery that we are processing is free of any trade blocks. That would be the goal. Like I mentioned before, you do not want to take a document all the way inside warehouse and start processing it and then realizing there is some trade checks and blocks with it. So the goal, as usual, would be before I take it all the way into the warehouse, do as many trade checks and possible and make sure it is free of any blocks, and then take it all the way into the warehouse and do a put away. So we will show you one example that Mara was showing earlier about a sanctioned party list where a vendor was blocked and because it's part of a sanctioned party list. So typically what happens is you create a PO with a vendor that is blocked. That PO gets transferred to GTS. As you see here, the PO got created and the data was transferred to GTS, and then this particular item is blocked because it's under sanctioned party list. Now, one of the things you need to note is in standard SAP, even if there is a block in GTS, standard SPL block in GTS for a particular purchase order, SAP would still allow you to create an inbound delivery in ACC. So basically, from a logistics perspective, there is nothing to indicate that there is a block in GTS and you're going to have a problem later in the supply chain. There is nothing like that. There's no indication. So you're allowed to create an inbound delivery. So we'll go ahead and create the inbound delivery. Just like you see here, an inbound delivery was created. But what you need to note here is, since this is a storage location that's EWM enabled, that inbound delivery was created and it was also tried to distribute. If you look at the message in the bottom, it says delivery has been distributed. Typically that would be the message you would get when you have an EWM relevant delivery. Now, like I mentioned here, even though purchase order was blocked in GTS, inbound delivery has not been transferred to GTS because there is a sanctioned party block, but inbound delivery is distributed to EWM. So the scenario here is, I have a purchase order. I created a purchase order in ECC that got transferred to GTS. It's blocked in GTS. I created an inbound delivery in ECC. and that was not transferred to GTS because there is already a block in GTS for the purchase order, but the inbound delivery was distributed to EWM already. So what we're trying to highlight here is basically there is a gap in terms of how checks happen in trade versus how logistics processes happen. They seem to happen in parallel, which would eventually cause you an issue because you're going to take it all the way through your supply chain, like I mentioned before, and then realize we have a trade block. So it's a break in the process, which we need to fix one way or the other. A couple of ways to fix it. One of them could be you can stop the inbound delivery creation itself in ECC. You can write a custom code and stop it. That would be similar to the COO check I showed you earlier. You could write a custom code, check it, GTS block, and stop it. The other thing you could do is you can create the inbound delivery, but you can, stop it from further processing in EWM. Now, depending on the company, depending on the client, and depending on the requirements of your processes, you could choose between one over the other. So in some cases, clients prefer the inbound delivery itself not to be created, and in some cases, they would like the inbound delivery to be created but not distributed. So in this case, what we're going to talk about is a scenario where inbound delivery is created in ECC, but you don't want it to process further in EWM. So step one, inbound delivery was created in ECC, but the inbound delivery was not available in GTS. So the first step would be you go and release the block in GTS for the purchase order, and then the inbound delivery immediately gets distributed to GTS. So this screenshot just shows you that the PO that we created earlier, or the inbound delivery we created for the PO earlier, is not available in GTS. And what we do is we release the GTS block, and then as soon as we release the GTS block, the inbound delivery now becomes available in GTS. The scenario right now is the inbound delivery is available in GTS, and we want to now make sure the EWM processes follow through. So one of the things that clients quite often ask me is, can I create the inbound delivery, but can I stop it from pushing it to EWM completely? Is that possible? Yeah, it is very much possible. The way you do that is you can go to a configuration in EWM that stops inbound delivery from being distributed to EWM completely. But that wouldn't necessarily work for you, because if you have only one or two POs that have a problem with SPL block, you do not want to stop all inbound delivery from being sent to EWM. Ideally, what you would want is you would want to stop POs or inbound deliveries that had issues in GTS alone, not to be sent to EWM. That is what ideally you want. Just because you have two POs or two inbound deliveries that have a problem, you do not want to make this config and stop all deliveries from distributing to EWM. So that's why we come in. We come up with a custom solution that we have implemented to one of our clients, where we actually go put in a code in inbound delivery processing in EWM, where we actually go back and check EWM, we go back from EWM to GTS and check inbound delivery to make sure if there is anything that would stop us from sending it further, if there is any GTS blocks. So this is one of the places where we actually build the communication between EWM and GTS. So we use some custom code and we go back to GTS, check if there is a GTS block, and if it is there, we would like to stop the inbound delivery, and we block the inbound delivery from further processing in EWM. Again, this slide gives you some technical detail behind how we blocked it. So we start from EWM, go back all the way to GTS, check, and if the PO is blocked, then we come back and then we stop it in the queue that goes to EWM. So in EWM, the data gets transferred between ECC and EWM via RFC queues. So we have written a code that basically blocks the inbound delivery from being sent to EWM all the way through. And we also have a custom message that tells you why I blocked it. And in this case, I blocked it because there was a GTS block. So by doing this, what we have made sure is we have met a customer's requirement in terms of they want to be able to create the inbound delivery in ECC, but they don't want to start the processes in EWM. So we have made sure that delivery is created in ECC, but the delivery is not processed in EWM. It's stopped in the queue. We also make sure we clearly identify why we stopped it from going to EWM. As you see here, we clearly say it's because of a GTS block on the PO number. Of course, we have also provided them an email capability that actually sends them the data about which PO we did not send because of GTS block and so on, so that the logistics users clearly know why I'm not able to process it or why I'm not able to go past this particular screen. So they communicate with GTS team, and GTS team eventually removes the block, and then the queue can be reprocessed. And the queue can obviously be reprocessed either manually, or you can set up a batch job that reprocesses the queue. But either way, as soon as the GTS block is removed, you can go ahead and push this into EWM and continue EWM inbound process. So just like I show here, once the queue is released, once the block is released, then you can go ahead and push this to EWM and then get your process started. Now, as I mentioned before, in Krypt, we have some custom development that we have done that actually pulls GTS information into EWM. So one of the things that we have done is this report. The main idea behind this particular report is it's going to act more like a dashboard for logistics users. Logistics users typically do not need to log on into GTS to find what blocks they have and if there is going to be any problem in the deliveries and shipments that are being processed during that day. So what we have done is, even though I call it a report, I would like to say that it's more like a dashboard. We have built something in EWM. What it does is by date, by processing date, it actually will tell you what deliveries are there in EWM and what the status of those deliveries are in GTS. So if you look at this output or this input, sorry, you basically tell which warehouse number, and you have a couple of other options in terms of processing date, or if you want to, select particular delivery and check its status, that is also possible. Like you see here, we can check both inbound as well as outbound. In this case, I'm going to check on the outbound deliveries, and then if I execute this, what I've done here is, if you see this is basically the EWM system. I've executed a dashboard in EWM which actually pulls GTS information and actually tells me where I am or what kind of block I'm going to have on particular delivery numbers. So the way it actually helps the logistics folks is, if you have a huge list of deliveries that you're processing that day, or if you have a shipment that contains 25 deliveries that need to be processed that day, and one of the deliveries is going to have a GTS block, it actually helps you make logistics decisions better, because you can now decide. You have two options: either you go back and find the delivery and clear the block in GTS, or you can decide, I'm going to remove the delivery from my shipment and then process the rest of the stuff and send it out of the door that day. Now we have a lot more things we have done with this dashboard. We can pull license information, and we can pull a lot more information from GTS. I've not shown all of that here, but basically all the necessary information that you can have in GTS about a particular delivery and shipment, I can use this dashboard and get all the information that I need from GTS. Subsequently, like you see here, if I can pull all this information, I can actually also use it to print it on EWM outputs. For example, if I have a packing list in EWM that I want to know what the license number in GTS is, just like I pull the data here, I can use this and print in any EWM document that I need. One of the things that you will realize is that every logistics document that goes out of the door, whether it's printed in ECC or EWM, you have certain foreign trade elements that you would like to see on those documents. And like I mentioned, in Krypt, we have, I would say, mastered the GTS EWM interface to a point where we can actually pull all relevant information from GTS back into EWM or ECC. So one of the items that I'm going to show is this report, and I also have something that we did for applied materials. Basically, as you see here, this is a packing list that is used in applied materials. What we have done is, this is an ECC packing list. Just like you see here, we are able to pull the ECC number and HTS number, and also the country of origin. In applied, we are very clear that GTS is the one source for all trade relevant information. So I know that there are some companies where you pull the information from GTS and use ECC to generate invoices, but in applied, we follow standard SAP process. We use a proforma. We create a proforma in ECC, and that transfers the data to GTS. All trade relevant information would be only in GTS, and we use GTS as the source for all trade documents. So while that works well because it's standard SAP, So we generate our commercial invoices in GTS, we generate our SED in GTS, SLI in GTS. So that works really well because it's standard SAP. Now, one thing, while it works well because we follow SAP processes, it kind of hurts logistics a little bit. And one thing we found out after the implementation of GTS was earlier the users were using ECC to print trade documents, so they had access to ECC. They could log on to ECC, perform their warehouse transactions, and also be able to produce GTS documents from ECC. Now we have introduced another system called GTS, and for trade they actually have to stop their shipping processes, log on to the trade GTS system, and then print trade documents. So this was going to become a problem, and there was also other requirements because we had a third-party provider who we were using, and they wanted to be able to print the trade documents to the local printer. In addition to that, we also were increasing cost because the more transactions a 3PL was doing, it ended up being more cost for the company. So what we did was we created a transaction in Applied which allows the users to stay in ECC and be able to generate a pro forma and be able to print trade documents from ECC. But in the background, what it actually does is it pulls up your GTS screen and allows them to print the relevant trade documents directly from the GTS screen. While we did that for Applied, in Krypt we also have a solution that will work with EWM as well, where if you are in EWM, you can directly print the trade documents without going back and forth between multiple systems. Now, before I go and actually show the demo, what I will be showing you is the capability where the user comes into this transaction. They can enter either a shipment number or a delivery number. One of the key things that you need to remember from a logistics perspective, that is what a warehouse user will know, either a delivery number or a shipment number. So what we've done is we have used a delivery or a shipment as the input in ECC. They enter that data there. In the background, what we do is we create a pro forma in ECC, and then we go into GTS. We pull the pro forma information into GTS, and then we find the relevant outputs that are relevant for that particular shipment. Now, we've also streamlined the process such that we go to GTS, all the relevant customer relevant outputs automatically show up in GTS. So it's a very streamlined process where the warehouse user, when they're ready to print export documents, they go into the screen, enter the delivery number. The next thing they see is a screen in GTS that pulls up all the outputs that they need. They just need to select all and print it to whichever printer they want, and they're done. So that is what I'm going to be showing real quick. Okay. So this is the transaction. Like I told you, you can either enter a shipment or a delivery. In this case, I chose to enter a delivery. You might also enter a shipment. You might also enter a shipment in cases where you have multiple deliveries put into one shipment. So if I execute this, in the bottom, you will see it is doing, first it needs to confirm the carrier. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to use this as a carrier. And if you see in the bottom, it's doing something called GTS document readiness. Now, what we have done and applied is make sure the logistics user doesn't get bogged down with trade issues. So anything or any possible reason why this document cannot be created, we do all the checks ahead of time. So I spoke about COO earlier. I spoke about SPL block. We do a lot more. We do checks about net weight. We do checks to make sure gross weight is not less than net weight. It does happen sometimes where the net weight is maintained incorrectly in the material master, and then after packing you realize the gross weight is less than net weight, and that's going to cause problems at the time of export. We also check country of origin, make sure all items have country of origin and so on, and a lot more. I mean, I don't remember all the checks, but we have quite a bit of checks that we do. And ultimate idea behind that is when that warehouse user executes this, if everything is good, no problems, you'll get the screen. And this actually is the GTS screen. I entered the data in ECC, but I'm right now in GTS. So all the user needs to do is select this, and then they can execute it. If they want to change the output or they want to change the printer, they can change the printer here, execute it, and it's going to print all these documents in whatever printer they choose. Once they're done with it, They just hit the arrow back, and then it's going to take you back all the way to ECC. There you go, I'm back in ECC. Now I'm back in ECC. We've also done one more thing, which is we also provided a reprint transaction. So while this is good for creating the pro forma and printing the commercial invoice, there is always choice and a chance where the user needs to reprint the documents. So we've created a custom transaction similar to this, which reprints and takes this user back to the same GTS screen where they can select and print. In the case of reprint, the only difference is we do not create a pro forma because the pro forma was already created in this first transaction. So the reprint just pulls the GTS information and shows it on the screen. Now, we go back to the presentation. So one other thing I would like to highlight is when we did this transaction between ECC to GTS, we also passed some ECC relevant information to GTS as well. Like, for example, shipment number, and then the number of packages and also the weight of the packages. So we pass this information. We also pass other information if in some cases like tracking number and so on, we can pass that information as well. So bottom line is when it goes to GTS, all the information that you want is already available in GTS, and it's going to show up as part of the commercial invoice and SCD, and the user just selects and prints it. So I think the key behind this was, like I said, make sure the warehouse user has minimum input in terms of printing trade documents, and everything that they need shows up in one screen. They just select it and print it, and they're done with it. So that was the idea behind it. So in Krypt, we already have a solution that works on ECC, as you saw. We also have a solution that works from EWM as well. In the case of EWM, again, they enter either the ECC document number or the EWM document number. In the background, we go all the way back to ECC, create the pro forma, and then pull the GTS information for the user. And they execute it, come out, and they're back in EWM. So we have this product, and we have it certified by SAP. So we would be happy to help you with any of the integration needs. We also have done a lot more customization. One of the things that you saw was with no problems, the GTS document showed up. And that was because we did a lot of checks ahead of time. Just like I said, COO, SPL, net weight, and a lot more. We have done all the checks ahead of time. So that is why we were able to seamlessly see the GTS invoice or commercial invoice in the GTS screen. Like I told you before, in terms of batch management and how to capture country of origin using batch management, Rajan and Prakash from Krypt have already written a detailed, article in SEM and giving you the link for that one. So if you need more data, you can obtain it from there. In summary, what we described was you would like to prevent trade-based delays as early as possible in the supply chain. Obviously, you do not want any issues later part of supply chain. One of the things I didn't mention, but it's well known, the master data needs to be in sync between all the systems to be able to make this work. Other thing we showed you was you can stop inbound deliveries with GTS blocks before you process it in EWM. And the one thing that I clearly explained was the custom transaction that we created for pro forma creation that allows the user to enter a delivery and get the GTS documents relevant from there. And then we also showed you how you can integrate standard SAP GTS blocks with EWM to make sure you don't have any problems in doing international shipping or shipment processing.